The Penguins have some big decisions to make with their restricted free agents this summer, and Pat and I are going to discuss what those decisions are right after this.
You're Locked On Penguins, your daily podcast on the Pittsburgh Penguins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes. You can follow me on Twitter at Hunter Hodes. Joined by my co-host, Patrick Dam. You can follow him on Twitter at SinnerForWet, and you can follow the show's Twitter at LO_Penguins. Of course, thank you all so much for making this your first listen/watch of the day. We are free and available on all platforms. And finally, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Down the Game Time app, create an account and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. So happy Tuesday to everyone out there. And we want to start today's show by getting into the restricted free agents that the Penguins have this upcoming summer. If you look at the roster right now, there's not too many RFAs, but there are still a couple of pretty important ones, namely P.O. Joseph. If you were to ask me what I would do with this player at the halfway point of this season, I probably would have said to move on. But then Joseph had a great end to the season, a really strong second half, but also a really good last 4 to 6 weeks. Played on the top pairing quite a bit with Chris Letang, also spent some time on the bottom pairing, and he had some really sound numbers, even away from Letang. 20 games without him, 96 minutes of 5-on-5 ice time. Without being with Letang, he had a 58% expected goals for rate, 7 goals for, 4 goals against. I saw him knowing when to pinch, knowing when to not pinch. I saw him play really well in his own zone. I also saw him driving more offense than normal. It looks like he's worked on his shot quite a bit. It's not just a quote-unquote muffin-like shot from the point as we saw earlier this season and then last season as well. He really started coming into his own in the second half of this season. And if you're asking me right now, Pat, I would bring him back. I don't think he's going to get that big of a raise. I mean, if you go to Cap Friendly right now, he only made $825K on his last contract. So he'll definitely get over $1 million, of course. But if you can get him for, I don't know, $1.5 million per year, maybe somewhere in that range, $1.5 to $2 million per, I think you're totally fine for a bottom pairing defenseman. I don't even know if he'll get to $2 million, but I do think this is a player that you bring back specifically for at least a bottom pairing role next year.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to double up his salary or anything into next year. I don't think he'll cross the $2 million threshold. But I agree overall. I liked his game the second half of the season, and he really appeared to have some chemistry with Chris Letang. And if you remember, there was a feature near the end of the year about Jack St. Ivany and Ryan Shea. And one of the things Shea brought up was that you look at the pairings that have worked well this season, those guys weren't just good on the ice together. They were close off the ice. They talked about how Karlsson and Pettersson really got along and became friends away from the rink. And we know how tight P.O. Joseph and Chris Letang are. And I think that's really a pairing that could work moving forward because they showed some real chemistry together. Part of it, yes, is that P.O. Joseph really started to discover his game and really just started to look comfortable as a regular NHLer. I think overall, that was his biggest impediment in the lead up to this season. He never really looked comfortable in a consistent NHL role. He would have 3 to 4 solid games, and then he would kind of disappear for 2 to 3 weeks. He could never really put any kind of consistency together. And now in the back half, and you had the numbers up, he looked really good fairly consistently the back half of the season. And if you're the coaching staff, if you're Kyle Dubas, this is a tough decision to make. Obviously, I think the easy decision is to bring him back. The tough decision is going to be where to play him, because I like that pairing of Joseph and Letang. Now, I don't think we have enough evidence because it was only the last handful of weeks of the season, if that can work for 60, 70, 80 games. But at the very least right now, early returns on the end of the season and where he was placed on the roster is encouraging.
I agree, though it is tricky because, yeah, I liked him with Letang at times, but I don't know if he's going to play that well over 70, 75, 80 games on the top pairing throughout a season. And I still think they need another top 4 defenseman. And we all saw what Dubas just said about Ryan Graves. It looks unlikely that he's going to be moving on from him after year one of that contract. So what do you do with Joseph? That's going to be the big question that Dubas has. Again, I would bring him back, but if you are hell-bent on bringing Graves back, he's probably going to get a top 4 spot again, and you don't want to go out and get another defenseman, then okay, you can bring Joseph back. But if you do want to go out there and get a defenseman from the market, or the UFA market, or the trade market, then I think bringing Joseph back has some complications overall, because he has shown that he belongs in the NHL no matter what. As for the other RFA that's at least on the roster right now, that is Emil Bemstrom, who was acquired during the season for the Penguins, $900K, heading into being an RFA. During his time with the Penguins, 3 goals, 5 points in 24 games. He was never going to score 6 to have that pick go up to a 3rd-round pick. I just didn't really see enough from him throughout his 20-25 game sample to make me want to bring him back for next season. I understand making that move during the season just because you're trying to get a spark in your bottom 6, but the production wasn't there. I'd rather see him go somewhere else, in my opinion.
It's become a common phrase among a lot of hockey analysts. He's a cardio merchant. He's got some speed. He's got a nice little shot, but he just doesn't really do much of anything else. And I'm right there with you. The idea of getting him to provide a bit of a spark for the bottom 6 seemed like a good idea at the time. You know, Nylander wasn't really working out as a Penguin after all those years. He, similar to Joseph, showed flashes, but there was never consistency there. So you try to get anything for him, and you got that guy. He did fine enough, but I mean, if they let him walk, it's no skin off my nose.
Yeah, you can find better production for cheap on the UFA market, on the trade market, someone that will give you more than 3 goals in 24 games overall. But those are the 2 players that are on the roster right now that are RFAs. There are still other RFA/UFAs that are not on the roster but are helping Wilkes-Barre in the playoffs this week. A couple of those. One, Sam Poulin makes a little over $860K going into his RFA year. I think they bring him back just because they want to give him a shot to make this team for next year. He has had a pretty sound year in Wilkes-Barre. He didn't do too much with his brief NHL sample, but that seems like a no-brainer to bring back.
I'm fine with bringing Poulin back. I mean, but this has to be it. This has to be the end of the road for him. He either figures it out this year, or it's so long, see you later, best of luck in your future endeavors. Because like I said, when he was up during the end of the season, I know that Sullivan catches a lot of rightful flack for pulling the plug on young guys very quickly. But in Poulin's case, he didn't really do anything worth getting more of a look. He was in the lineup, and that's really the best I can say about what he did. I didn't expect him to light it up. I didn't expect him to come in and score a pile of goals and move up the lineup in just a handful of games. But in the limited minutes he got, it was the worst thing you can say for a guy like him, and it's that we just didn't notice him.
Yeah, you got to stand out when you have a chance like that, and he wasn't able to, which was a little unfortunate. You know, we'll have to see if he gets that chance next season, but still, I'm fine bringing him back on a 2-way contract overall. A big one, Jackson Ivany. He was tremendous for the Penguins down the stretch, is looking more and more like a clone of Chad Weedle. Each game you watch of him, he has a very active stick in his own zone, was great one-on-one against players coming in the Penguin zone, was great from the blue line, just has a knack of playing really well in all 3 zones. He's more than ready for the NHL. He should be the favorite to be this team's number 6 defenseman next season. He's not really going to cost you anything, just like Chad Weedle didn't really cost the Penguins anything when he was on the bottom pairing for the last several years. Easy one, slam dunk sign, if you're asking me.
Oh, for sure. I mean, and it's not going to cost you a lot because he's a young guy that doesn't have a ton of game experience under his belt. He's not exactly going to be due for any sort of gigantic raise. You look at him right now, he makes all of $857,000 against the cap. And for the role he's going to play, you're not going to pay him any more than $1 million, 1.2, something like that, just because he's not a high-end prospect. And that's no disrespect to him. Just the game that he plays is not a flashy game. It's not high octane. It's not offense. It's just a very solid 2-way defensive game. And what he showed us in the last few weeks of the season show me that he belongs on this roster in the number 6 spot.
It's funny, you give someone like that a chance, he ran with it. And I'm just really happy that he played that well down the stretch. A couple more here before we head to break, though. We got Ryan Shea. He's a UFA. He made $775K this past season. I'm fine with bringing him back as the team's number 7, number 8 defenseman. At the start of the season, I wasn't too impressed by his play. I was like, oh, here's a guy who really doesn't look ready for the NHL, was making a lot of mistakes in his own zone, wasn't bringing anything offensively. But towards the late stages of the season, after getting called back up, he looked like a completely different player. He looked like someone who got some seasoning in the AHL, looked like someone who really worked on the defensive side of his game, brought a little bit more offense to the table. I could definitely see them bringing him back as a number 7, number 8 guy, and I'm actually probably in favor of it.
He's 27, and similar to St. Ivany, does not play a very flashy game. His upside isn't gigantic. He's not going to be a top pairing guy. He's definitely a third pairing guy, and maybe his ceiling is second pairing if he really develops over the next couple of years. But again, it's a good depth option that showed that he can hang in the NHL when needed. So again, similar guy. If they bring him back, I'm not going to be upset. If they let him walk again, I think there's a handful of guys you can find in free agency or the draft or even in your system right now that can play that same exact role as your 7th or 8th defenseman who plays on a top pairing in the AHL and then comes up and fills in well in the National League.
And he'll come cheap too. A lot of these players are going to come back really cheap for the Penguins. And speaking of that, Valtteri Pusin is really the last player that I want to get to. He is actually a UFA heading into this offseason, but someone that I very much want the Penguins to bring back. I was worried when he first came up because I thought he was going to be just like the other Wilkes-Barre call-ups that you saw throughout the season for the most part, but he quickly became not one of the regular call-ups. His shot is awesome, really good playmaker at the NHL level. Yeah, he cooled down the stretch a little bit, but he's still someone that I want in this lineup on an every night basis. He brings that youth, that speed that this team really needs. And if you put him in a 3rd or 4th line role, I think he can flourish. I would definitely want him back on this team next year.
He's all of 24 years old. He showed a lot of promise this year. He did burn out in his first stretch and then cooled down at the end of the season, but the tools are there for him to be an impactful NHL player. And when you have a guy at that age with that kind of cost control, it's very easy to make that decision to bring him back. And I think going into training camp and going into next year, he's going to push for a consistent role in the NHL. And similar to the other guys we've talked about, they didn't do so well that they're going to command a big pay raise. So you can get them to work on the cheap, and they can give you some big production. And as Kyle Dubas has spoken about at length since the season ended, and even since the trade deadline, it brings you another injection of youth into a lineup that so badly needs it.
100%. And there is Jonathan Gruden. He is also an RFA. I'm fine with bringing him back on a 2-way contract. I at least liked him a little bit in the NHL, but I don't think he is a long-term player in this league at this point overall. But those are our thoughts on the Penguins' main RFAs for the season and a little bit of their younger UFAs as well. Who do you think they should bring back from that crop? Let us know down in the comments. You can send us all a DM on social media and all that good stuff. But that'll do it for this first segment. Coming up in the second segment, Pat and I are going to discuss players other than Sidney Crosby that are eligible for extensions this offseason that Kyle Dubas could look to sign. But before we get to that, we got to tell you all about Game Time. It's now an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch, with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. You can save up to 60% off buying last-minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. You can also save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or event. You can also save even more when you choose a section and let Game Time choose the seats for you. You can get a great view from your seat in the app before you buy. Also, the lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, we're back here on this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes, joined by my co-host, Patrick Damp. So yes, outside of Sidney Crosby, there are a few candidates in mind that could extend with the Penguins this summer, one of which is Marcus Pettersson, who had another tremendous year for the 2023-2024 season. I think when you look at this season as a whole, he was the Penguins' most consistent defenseman. And I hope that's not a hot take, just because there were plenty of times where Erik Karlsson had a lot of bad plays in his own zone. You also had Chris Letang had a very rotten end to his season. The last 4 to 6 weeks of the season, he was flat out awful. But Pettersson was consistent throughout. There really weren't too many instances where his play dipped, and he makes a little over $4 million on his contract right now. He's expected to be a UFA for the 2025-2026 season. This is a player that I keep yesterday. This is a player that I keep today. And this is a player that I keep tomorrow. I think this is going to be a very big contract. If I had to guess, 6 to 7 years, max term, somewhere in there, over $5.5 million per season. He is worth it, in my opinion. I know he's going to be well over 30 during a lot of that contract, but that is someone who you don't let go. I shudder to think about what this team's defense would look like without him there. You have to sign him, in my opinion.
I agree with you. And you look at cap friendly going into that season. I mean, the Penguins are going to have more than $40 million available in cap space. And that's obviously, we don't know what's going to happen with Sid this summer. They obviously are signaling that they're going to sign him to an extension. So, you'll probably have, instead of $42 million in cap space, you'll probably have somewhere between 35 and 34. But that's also going to be a big summer for Kyle Dubas and the Penguins, because he'll have a really good opportunity in front of him going into the 26-27 season to really reshape the roster. Because you look at it as it stands right now, and this also, again, does not take into account a potential Sidney Crosby extension, which we know is going to get done. You'll only have left on the roster Brian Rust, Ricard Raquel. You'll have Erik Karlsson, Chris Letang, and Ryan Graves, excuse me. So there is a lot of opportunity for them to really shift the balance of this roster and where it's going into that season. And Marcus Pettersson should be a part of it. Now, I don't know if they're going to go into a rush to put him to an extension, because as you can tell, there's a lot of love between the two, the organization and Marcus Pettersson. He likes playing here. They like having him. It doesn't feel like it'll get contentious. It feels like it'll be a, hey, this is a business type thing, and we'll work on you into next year and get something figured out. But overall, I'm right there with you that this is a guy you lock up. This is a guy you keep. He's a steady defenseman. If you can get him on 5-6 years with not a super heavy AAV, that's a contract that can age really well.
Agreed. And I know there's going to be talk about potentially trading him before you sign him or something like that, but I'm just not really interested in going down that route. Sure, you could get quite a haul for him, but without Marcus Pettersson, who on this defensive core is going to play lockdown defense for you on a nightly basis? With all due respect to Chris Letang and Erik Karlsson, they are not as good in their own zone as Marcus Pettersson is, and neither is Ryan Graves. Is P.O. Joseph as good as Pettersson is in his own zone? No. Jackson Ivany? No. So if you go down that route, you have to have a replacement ready to go for him, and they don't have that player in-house right now. And even if you go to the UFA market at that rate or the trade market, I don't know if you're going to get as good of a defenseman as him if you do move on from him. So I did want to end with that. A couple other players to keep in mind for potential extensions this offseason. Another one, Drew O'Connor. 16 goals, 33 points this past season, really came into his own overall. He's only making $925,000 heading into next season, Pat. Then he's a UFA the season after. If I am Kyle Dubas in the front office, I think I might get a head start on that extension, because if he goes off even more this upcoming season, and I'm talking about 20, 22, 23 goals, maybe he's someone that gets over 40 to 45 points in a third line role or even a top 6 role at times, he is going to get quite a bit of money on that next deal. I would try to get ahead of that if possible.
And it really feels like that's a guy they've ticketed as they want him to be part of their future. So you might as well just get it done and lock him up. He's a younger player. He's shown a lot of upside. And again, given what he's done up to this point, if you can do that extension now and get him to agree to it, you can get him to work cheap again. And he's going to very much outperform that contract. And that's good news for you, because you look at his body of work up until the end of this season, it's not worthy of some back up the Brinks truck kind of extension. If you can get him locked in early, that's a very savvy move, but that also brings into the other side of the discussion of, is that what he wants? Does he want to get locked up longer term early, or does he want to take a bet on himself and have a big year and go look for a pay raise, which he very much could?
Oh, I wouldn't be surprised if he did do that. It's just, I would love if they could get him to an extension before he potentially breaks out even more, because I think he might just be scratching the surface here when it comes to how much potential he has in the NHL. This next one, it's a bit of a lower possibility, but we do have to throw it out there. Lars Eller, he still has another year left on his contract right now. If you look at Cap Friendly, he is making $2.45 million for this next season before becoming a UFA for the 2025-2026 season. He's 34 right now. So again, low possibility, but we do have to put it out there. Eller had a really good year for the Penguins this year, 15 goals, 31 points. I don't think he's really going to be looking for a raise on his next contract, considering he's going to be into his late 30s at that point, but he's still someone that I could see the Penguins maybe signing to a 1-year extension or something like that. No, I just don't want a repeat of the Jeff Carter contract, for example, where he really falls off after having a pretty sound year. 1-year extension, I could see it, but again, still low probability, but wanted to put it out there for everyone.
To me, that's a summer of kind of deal. You don't extend him ahead of the time.
Fair.
Yes, he did have a very good year. Yes, he exceeded expectations. But again, we talked about this with him all year long. If you're a contender, he's not your third line center. He's your fourth line center. And that's no disrespect to him. That's just the kind of game that he plays. And for the Penguins, I think the smartest thing would be let him play it out. If he has a good year again next year, you engage him in talks next summer, see if you can get him back on the cheap for a year, maybe 2. And if not, thanks for the memories. Thanks for all your help. Best of luck down the road.
Right. He'll be able to go to another team to a 1 or 2 year contract with probably a little less pay, just because he'll be in his late 30s at that point anyway. One more player before we kick this to break. Jesse Puljujarvi, $800K for next season. He'll be a UFA the season after that. I just want to see him get actual playing time this season, because I want to see what they have in this player. I think when he finally got into the lineup, you saw the potential that he had for this team. It's just that Mike Sullivan kept scratching him for players that were worse than him. Hopefully that's not going to be a problem this year. And if he is able to have a pretty good year and get back to the level that we've seen him play at in other places, he could also be an extension candidate, and he's not really going to cost you much either.
No, and you don't have to extend him this summer. You got to let him, you got to make him prove it this coming season.
Low probability, but had to put it out there.
Yeah, let him prove it this season, have a bounce back year, be in the lineup consistently, like he did the last few weeks of the season, where he had a great game against Carolina and really proved that he belonged in the lineup for the remainder of the season. So you want to have him build off that. And if he has a good year next season, when you're about 75% or all the way through it, you can sit down with him and figure out what he's figuring and what he wants long-term.
Agreed. And I think that will do it for this second segment of today's episode. Coming up in the final segment, we're going to take a look at the farm again, as Wheeling got a big win in their playoff series on Monday. Plus, Wilkes-Barre has added quite a few reinforcements as they are going all in for the Calder Cup this year. But before we get to that, we got to tell you all about a couple sponsors, including FanDuel. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every single game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that is safe, secure, and very easy to use. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. That's FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And we're not done. We still got to tell you all about Policy Genius, which is the country's leading online insurance marketplace. It saves you time and money so you can provide your family with a financial safety net starting today. With Policy Genius, you can find life insurance policies that start at just $292 per year for $1 million of coverage. Some options offer same-day approval and avoid unnecessary medical exams. Policy Genius also helps you compare your options from top companies, and their team of licensed experts is on hand to help talk you through it. Talk to a team of award-winning agents who will walk you through the process step by step. You can also easily compare quotes from America's top insurers in just a few clicks to find your lowest price. Your work-life insurance policy may not offer enough protection for your family's needs. Even worse, it may not come with you if you leave your job. Policy Genius gives you unbiased advice from a licensed expert support team. They have no incentive to recommend one insurer over another, so you can trust their guidance. Check life insurance off your to-do list in no time with Policy Genius. Head to policygenius.com/lockedonnhl or click the link in the description to get your free life insurance quotes and see how much you could save. One more time, that's policygenius.com/lockedonnhl. All right, we're back here in this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes, joined by my co-host, Patrick Dam. So, Pat, Wilkes-Barre, they added quite a few really sound prospects to their Calder Cup roster as Wilkes-Barre, again, is going all in for the playoffs this year. They added Owen Pickering, Ville Koivunen, Emil Pieniemi, and Cooper Foster to the roster. 4 really strong prospects in the Penguin system. Cooper Foster is someone who really doesn't get talked about enough, but had a really good year this year in the OHL. 59 games, 21 goals, 52 points in 59 games. And in the playoffs for them, he had 2 goals and 6 points in 10 games. He was also great in the OHL last year with 36 points in 63 games, but he had a pretty big jump this year overall. Really strong shot, good playmaker. I'm curious to see how he does in the AHL now.
You can really tell right now that Kyle Dubas is going all in on the youth movement here in Pittsburgh, because you look at previous years, a lot of these guys who, few were they, but that were in the system, they kept them in juniors. They kept them in college and told them next year. This year, pretty much anybody that's got a chance to get an extended look coming into camp this year is going to Wilkes-Barre, is going to Wheeling, is getting a chance to prove themselves at the professional level. And I think this hints to us that when we get to camp in August and September, that a lot of these younger guys are going to get extended looks. It's not going to be, you're there for the first week, you're there for a week and a half, and then we kick you back to whatever college or junior team you came from. These guys are going to get a legitimate opportunity to show that they belong at the professional level, and it's long overdue. And again, I do think that while a lot of these guys still aren't exactly NHL ready, there is no better development than giving them the chance to prove themselves, give them the chance to play, give them the chance to understand what playing at the professional level means, and give them a chance to fail. Give them a chance to screw up and learn, because this putting them in a hermetically sealed bubble and they got to do everything perfect, and as soon as they screw up, kick them back, let them learn, because the easiest way to figure out what you do well and what you do wrong is to do things wrong and learn from it. So I'm excited to see how a lot of these guys perform with the Nailers, how they perform with the Baby Penguins, and another big experience, even if it's at the Calder Cup playoffs, is to go on a long run, to understand what the grind of a professional playoff is like, especially in the AHL, because it's not the National Hockey League where you finish the game, you got your nutritionist right there, you got the gym right there, then you go on the plane and you fly into a nice hotel and you get all the amenities and everything. No, this is, you finish the game, there's a chance you play the very next night. And then after that night, you jump on a bus and you bus your way to the town. And then you're not in the best hotel. You're not going to get the best food. You got to learn how to deal with it. You got to learn how to play through it. And I think this is huge for these guys.
Do I think any of these players will be on the opening night roster next year? No, but this is a great chance for them to further their development. And for some of these guys, experience playing in North America for one of their first times. Like, that's another big thing that I'm looking forward to as well. And then for Pickering's case, I've been kind of, what's the word I'm looking for here? Back and forth about his development over the last couple of years. He just hasn't developed at the pace that I thought he was going to. I mean, this year he did have 7 goals, 46 points in 59 games for his team in the WHL, had 7 points in 9 playoff games, but I still have been wanting to see more from him overall. This will be a big opportunity for that. I don't think he's going to be ready to play next year. I think he's still at least a year, if not 2, maybe even 3 years away from being a contributor at the NHL level, but I still want to see if he can take that next step in his development, maybe in the playoffs here and then heading into next season as well. Really excited about him. And then Ville Koivunen, man, he was awesome in his league, La Liga, overseas this year. 22 goals, 56 points in 59 games. And in the playoffs, he had 5 goals and 13 points in 12 games for his team. He was on a loan for that team. I'm super stoked to see what he can do in the AHL after coming over in the Jake Gensel trade a little over a month ago. Really excited for him.
Yeah, and then on the other end of it, you also have the guy that we were infatuated with in training camp, and that's Braden Yeager, who's absolutely lighting it up for Moose Jaw right now with 7 goals and 14 points in 9 WHL playoff games. So while the farm system isn't restocked yet, there's a lot of potential there.
Right. Yeager, if his season ends early, they have Memorial Cup aspirations right now, but if his season does end early, I can 1,000,000% see Wilkes-Barre being like, okay, you're going to come here and you're going to help us try to win the Calder Cup. And I would love to see him come to Wilkes-Barre because I think he could be an impact player right away for them. I, again, love how Yeager got back to basics this year. He used his shot quite a bit. I still don't think he's NHL ready yet this season. I still think he's at least a year, if not 2 away, but his development is going really nicely overall right now. And then for Pieniemi, he's a player who I'm also intrigued about. He didn't put up too many flashy numbers this year, but he's kind of more of a defensive defenseman in his own zone. Curious to see how that goes as well. But Pat, I'm going to hand this over to you now. How did your former employer win last night as Wheeling is now up 2-1 in its series?
Big W for the Nailers last night in game 3. They had a couple of blown leads against the Indy Fuel, but just 30 seconds into overtime, Justin Adamo scores the winning goal for the Nailers at West Banco Arena to get them a huge game 3 victory to take a 2-1 series lead in their opening round series. And I mean, again, we talked about this a little bit yesterday. You know, it sucks that we don't have Stanley Cup playoff content to talk about with the Penguins, but both the Nailers and Baby Penguins are very much in go for it mode as a team. And I already said it on this episode. There is no better experience than winning. There is no better development than winning. Winning, as we know, is a habit, is contagious. And, you know, I look back to the first full season that I worked for the Wheeling Nailers, which was 2015-16, they made a run all the way to the Kelly Cup final. And that was a team with guys who carved out, whether it was 2-way deals, other places in the NHL, or guys who came up and played for the Penguins. So this is a very good sign for the organization that you have your minor league teams playing competitive hockey. Because I remember I brought this up at the start of the season where Kyle Dubas filled out a lot of the organization with guys who can play at both the ECHL and AHL levels because you want them to be playing meaningful hockey. You don't want them just going to the ECHL or the AHL and thinking, all right, if I do a season here and I do well, I'm going to go up and then I'm going to get my shot. No, you want these guys going there in playing actual meaningful hockey and having something to play for, because it's going to bring out the best of them. And it's going to further their development and give the Penguins more depth and more options in their system when they are needed to be called upon.
I know the Penguins are in the playoffs this year, but it's great to see both farm teams doing really well this year overall. Game 4 set for Tuesday at 7 o'clock. And then remember, Game 5 this weekend from the UPMC Lemieux Complex up in Cranberry. If you want to go, tickets will be available if you want to go check out Wheeling. And then for Wilkes-Barre, just outside of the reinforcements, it's going to be great seeing players like Poulin play, Puusinen, St. Ivany, Blomqvist will be getting starts, and of course, Panamera. I mean, he's also going to be an option for this team in training camp to make the team. Curious to see how he does as well. There's a lot of really fun storylines when it comes to Wilkes-Barre's playoffs this year. But unless you had anything to say about the Stanley Cup playoffs on Monday night, I think that would do it for this Tuesday edition of the Locked On Penguins podcast. Thank you all so much for taking the time to listen to / watch this episode. Pat and I will be back with another episode for you all on Wednesday as we continue to chug along with the offseason. So for Patrick Damp, I am Hunter Hodes. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We'll talk with you all on Wednesday.